Welcome to Hospitality Meets with me, Phil Street, where each week we take a light-hearted look into the stories and individuals that make up the wonderful world of hospitality. Today's guest is the high-octane Paul Spencer, Operations Director at the beautiful apart hotel creators, Lock. Coming up on today's show, Paul reveals that he socialises with house elves.
And I came out the other side of it, really. Had a good time at Dobby's.
Phil and Paul show their love for their dogs.
I actually mostly talk kinder to my dog, actually.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
And Paul recounts a slight out-of-depth experience.
I remember the first day I was there, I was like, okay, this is looking good. An hour later, I'm on the pass trying to work out how I got like 3,500 checks to deal with.
All that and so much more as Paul chats us through his epic journey so far. Paul talks with incredible energy and passion about his craft and demonstrates how far you can go when you apply that, along with a desire to keep learning. I was hugely grateful to him for giving me the time in his hectic schedule, especially as Lock continue to grow. Don't forget, we launch a brand new episode each week telling the amazing and always amusing stories from hospitality. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and give us a like and a share across your favourite social networks. Enjoy! Hello and welcome to the next episode of Hospitality Meets with me, Phil Street. Now, I'm super delighted to get some time with today's guest as he's, well, one busy individual, I think that's fair to say, but is also leading operations for one of the most exciting brands in the hotel and specifically the apart hotel scene. So a massive welcome to the Director of Operations for the Eden Group, Paul Spencer.
Thank you very much. That's quite an intro to live up to for the rest of the interview, isn't it?
No pressure. So how are you doing anyway?
Yeah, really good, thanks. You know, it's an exciting time for us and our industry, isn't it? As we sit between the limbo of reopening and fully open. It's great to see life coming back into cities. It's great to see life coming back into the business. So yeah, I think it's the blend of an exciting time as our country reopens and a more exciting time for us as we double in size this year. So yeah. It's quite those two things alone I think are two full-time jobs. So.
For sure, and I could kind of lend weight to that because we're here meeting. This is the first meeting podcast that I've done since a year gone February. So and here we are on the 28th. Yeah, better. No pressure again. No pressure again. So yeah, explain where we are today.
So we're in Bermondsey Lock in Bermondsey, which is one of our newest locks. It's an incredible apart hotel. We have a co-working space, coffee shop, amazing restaurant, and over 130 apartments here as well. It's got a beautiful courtyard, and it's a hotel that's in its infancy, really. I suppose we've never had a chance to test and prove it. So while we opened last year, this stage of reopening is kind of relaunching the brand as well for us. So it's a really exciting time. And I think Bermondsey, what you can see here, designed by Holloway Lee, has got a great story behind it. As you walk around, you'll see that come into play a bit more, all about Mojave Desert. It's a good link into Bermondsey.
Of course.
We design really soulful spaces, and Bermondsey is one of these. So yeah, I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, well, even just walking down from Liverpool Street today, Bermondsey's transformed and is continuing to transform. Yeah. So I guess strategically, it wasn't just there's a space, let's develop it. There's look what's happening here. Let's kind of be part of that change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we own our property, so for us it's an important part of our strategy as well. We've just opened another property in Dalston again, so another area which is really up and coming. And it's important that we have locations that not only are suitable for the type of business that we are, but also the guest type that we're looking for as well. That sort of digital nomad, people that are looking to travel and be part of something, but equally looking for their own individual space as well. Yeah. Which is why you'll notice today the hotel is a busy place, even though we're not fully open yet. Yeah. Just the amount of residents that we have, key workers that are staying with us, and the importance of those locations to them.
Yeah, I mean that's really exciting already because you're not fully open yet you still have a buzz when you walk into the reception.
Yeah, and that's kind of core to what we do really because we're staffing light model. Lock is a light staff model, but actually what's core of that is human interaction, and we really focus a lot of our time and a lot of our resource to making sure we find the right people to work with us. Now everyone says that, but actually living and breathing that's a really hugely important part of what we do, and your cultural fit over your technical skills can sometimes be more important.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that's prevalent in you're doing something new, and so you're effectively designing your own culture at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm really privileged, right? I work with some amazing people and surrounded by some amazing people, and I sit on the senior leadership function for the business. And we had our first face-to-face meetings. The first time I've seen some of them, I started my job in lockdown, so most of my meetings with my peers have been on Teams. But we had a senior leadership team meeting a few weeks ago now, about 5 weeks ago, and half a day was purely dedicated to people. Now, a lot of companies talk about it, but actually I sat there, pens down, just pure focused on what do we want to be, how do we want to be known, who do we want to talk to, and to have a business that at that level is dissecting it in that detail, the pride that brings is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, before you got to here, there's a whole story of how you arrived here. So if you'll indulge us, take us all the way back to the beginning. How the hell did you get into hospitality in the first place?
Okay, so I got into hospitality as a chef. Actually, is how
did you really?
Yeah,
right.
Even you're surprised by that.
Yeah,
right?
well, do you know, I tried to do some research on you.
I know, I'm like
I went back so far, and I was like, okay, so very seasoned GM and beyond, but before that, no idea how you kind of got there.
I think, look, let's talk very openly about it, which is that, I was never very successful at school. I came out of school with not a lot, a bit of dented pride, being crap at rugby, and, most probably not really having the education that my parents really wanted me to have. I just never found it didn't fit. It didn't fit how I wanted to learn, that classroom sort of style. And I learned a lot about myself. So I went off to college, went to South Downs College on the south coast, and that's where I really discovered myself. I studied cookery, and genuinely my life changed from there, to be honest with you. I kind of had always been passionate about cookery, and I didn't really understand why. It only turns out later that sort of practical application of what you learn was really important to me. And that sort of creative, artistic talent that sits within you is a huge part of what we do. So I was privileged. I've worked in Rouen, worked in Paris, came back into London again, worked here. I've done a lot of chef roles in a lot of places. And one of my favourite jobs was a little part-time chef at a pub. It's just little bits where you learn and get involved in it. And my chef career was great, and I really enjoyed it. And I met some of the brothers and sisters that work in hospitality. I admire anyone that works behind the pass or in front of the pass. They have the toughest job in our business, and the skill that comes with that, I think, is admirable, to be honest with you. And we've all had a good day and a bad day behind the pass, and they are sweaty at the best of times, I would say. So I think the thing that I noticed more of being a chef is that there was something missing. I didn't really understand what that was at that time. And I started to become really career focused. I started really wanting to learn.
What age were you at this point, roughly?
Early 20s.
Right.
I benchmarked myself around there. Don't ask me how old I am now, because I can't even tell you.
Yeah, that's fine. That's not on the list of pre-approved questions.
What I discovered is I was working with some amazing people in kitchens, and some of my best friends for life I've made there. Actually, a lot of my best friends for life I've made in the kitchen. But I was missing an energy, and the energy was that I wasn't surrounded by people in a different way. So I moved front of house, so I did the ultimate chef sin, which was I became a waiter, which is, I'm mostly going to be disowned if this podcast gets released. A lot of things will happen. But
sorry, this is going out publicly.
I think, for me, it's about putting your ego to one side and your pride to one side, and understanding actually what you want to attain out of your life. And I realised school wasn't for me, but what I did realise is there was something for me, and that thing was hospitality. So I moved front of house. I learned quick and fast about how you do things.
Does that, having spent some time behind the pass, did that make you a better front of house person, because you kind of had an understanding of how the inner workings of a kitchen?
It certainly meant I didn't get picked on by the chefs,
right?
Because I spoke their language, but cooking teaches you multi-skilling, and to be anything good front of house, multi-skilling is a core part of what you do, understanding multiple challenging situations at one time. So there was that, but it also, I had pretty good chat, because being back of house, obviously it's a banter-filled environment outside of service. So I had all of that going for me, and I threw myself into it. I remember one of the sort of defining jobs for me was I got a job in a hotel in Bournemouth called the Carlton. and I was a general assistant, which basically meant you did all of the crap jobs that no one else wanted you to do. You had to kind of work your way through them.
It's a learning experience.
Yeah, it was, but that's the best thing that it gave me actually, is, you know, I got to work in housekeeping, I got to work on reception, I got to work in all of these areas that I'd never seen or understood.
Yeah.
And I caught the bug. Instantly I caught the bug, and that became what I wanted to be and how I wanted to be it. So I've always been lucky in my career to be able to vision very carefully 2 or 3 roles ahead of where I want to be. So I've always been laser focused on that. So what that's enabled me to do is shape my learning, shape my contacts, ask the right questions to get there. So as this sort of general assistant, I knew I wanted to be a GM. But at the time, the step from one to the other was ridiculous. So I thought, okay, I need to learn how finance works, I need to learn how we do purchase orders, you know, I need to learn all of this stuff. Yeah. How do we sell rooms? So very humbly, I spent my time off shift with the finance controller or the revenue manager and just asked a million questions, and you know, I'm grateful to them. My approach from the Carlton then was to the Grand Harbour in Southampton, a lovely 5-star hotel. I became director of F&B for them.
Was that a De Vere at the time?
It was a De Vere, yeah. Working with a guy called Steve Dunford, who's still in my life to this day actually. He talks faster than me. I think that's where I
Really?
Yeah, no, I know. I think that's where I caught it from. But it's also where I met my mentor, who is still in my life today, a guy called David Walker. And David, up until last week, is still giving me counsel and advice, which is, I think it's important throughout your career, you meet people who keep you grounded. Yeah. David certainly keeps me grounded. He sent me a message the other day saying he's glad that I've toned my swearing down. You know, and I'm in my mid-40s. The fact that he'll send me that, I think, is great. So, started at the Grand Harbour. I'd moved into this F&B role. I knew it was my strength because I understood back of house and front of house. And it was a 5-star hotel, so it was my first real chance to get into it and understand what hospitality was all about. Yeah,
it's actually a hotel that I know well because my start in hospitality came on cruise ships. With P&O, and I always used to just recommend that hotel for anybody that wanted, you know, it was probably it was a really dramatic atrium, right? I mean, but it was probably the premier of all the hotels in Southampton at that time. Yeah, and that would, for me, that would have been early 2000s.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, you know, that was De Vere's pride, right? It was on the south coast. They had the Royal Bath, they had the Grand Harbour, and then obviously the Grand in Brighton as well. So it was the 3 old ladies of the south coast. So working for Steve at the Grand Harbour, I learned a lot. I learned a lot fast as well, because suddenly I was into, you know, big restaurants, banqueting for, I think it was up to 650 people, all things that were relatively new for me, and I put myself in a dangerous situation. I got a job that I was over-promoted for, but my passion and hunger said that I will learn how to do it. I will just, if I'm working later and earlier than everyone else to make sure I'm successful, then I'll do it. You know, it was quite a defining moment. I think I was there nearly 4 years with Steve actually. You know, it's a massive part of who I shaped myself into at the end of the day, that relentless quest for knowledge, that acceptance that actually building a better team around you than you are at those tasks is the huge core of successful leadership. Yeah. Because I made a lot of mistakes along the way, right? You know, you if you're not careful as you get promoted through hospitality, you start to believe your own hype, when in reality you have to just be humble and accepting of the challenges that face you. So Grand Harbour was a great step for me. I'd met David, I was working with Steve. I actually met a lot of my friends that I still talk to today. We've all gone on different career paths throughout. I've stayed in hospitality, but you know, love those guys dearly. When I was talking to David, who was my ops director there, I told him that I wanted a GM's job. So he said, if you want a GM's job, DGM's the next step for you. How mobile are you? And I was like, well, I don't really know. How mobile do I need to be? Well, you're moving to Warsaw. So up to Birmingham we went. You know, that was quite a defining moment. But for me, career was so important that, you know, my wife Lucy at the time was very, very focused that that's what we had to do as a family. So my first son, Charlie, was born in Birmingham, so I had a heavily pregnant wife when we moved. Right. Moving to a location we didn't know with no friends around us, and you know, I was committed to a lot of work, and having that support network around you is really important. So I took over a DGM of Village Warsaw, it was actually, so still within the De Vere group at the time.
Yeah, the Village were
blowing up at the time. It was one of those, and this was a new build. So I'd got to see my first new build. I worked with a general manager called David Sims, again, another good influence on my life. And yeah, it's the first time I've been to the build experience. So, you know, all of the fun that came of working out of the porta cabin, the pain that came of working out of a porta cabin, you know, and it was the first time I really learned about setting it up. Like, how do you set up a function? How do you genuinely set up a restaurant from scratch? How do you set up a bar from scratch? How do you set up a leisure club from scratch? And the sort of the strategic view you need to have on doing that, and the people you recruit, and massive part of it. So again, most probably a little bit over promoted, if I'm honest. You know, most probably one of those things that at the time I always think you should be in a job that gives you a little bit of anxiety and a lot of excitement, because you just I thrive on that teetering piece where am I good enough? Can I do this? Is this enough? Am I going to be okay? And yet performance and good results and everything that comes out of the back, because I need the heady balance of stress and insecurity to sort of keep me going.
Right.
And this was one of those moments.
But you also need people to see that you can kind of deal with that, right? That nobody would give you that opportunity if they didn't see something in you.
Yeah,
most likely.
And also the passion that you have for the industry, I think, is important. You know, how I talk about the business and how I talked about what I wanted to achieve within that. You know, hospitality's been my home for 30 years. You know, it's a huge part of who I am as a person as well. And slowly over time, any work persona and personal persona have just blended into Paul. So the person that is at work today, talking to my team today, is the same person that goes home and talks to my wife and my kids and my dog. I actually mostly talk kinder to my dog, actually.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So here we are at Village Warsaw. Very interesting experience. Working with David, open it. Really, really good. Really amazing, actually. And you know, I learned a lot, we did a lot. We then changed general managers. David left and I had a new general manager came in. And this was most probably one of the most pivotal parts of my career. The general manager who came in, I just didn't agree with. And at a young age, you know, you go through a few, you know, why don't I agree with him? Why is he suddenly jarring with who I am as a person? And you start to realise you're defining your leadership style. You're starting to realise that actually my core values are now starting to come out in how I approach my people and my team and what I want and the desires that are within that. And this gentleman just didn't agree with it. And it was him that made me want to be a GM more than anything, because I wanted to be the opposite of what he was. He actually drove me harder than any success I've ever had, because he was the epitome of everything I despised about the industry. And that it's a huge thing to say, but genuinely a massive moving part of my life. So I quit. I just did it, jacked it, because
that's kind of, I think you've got to have the courage of your conviction in that moment, haven't you? Because there's a clash and you're not moving in the same direction, then you might as well
kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I was still young. I had a young baby, and you know, all of the other things that were happening, but I couldn't do it. Yeah. I just couldn't do it. Yeah. I couldn't compromise my personal value set to do that. So I met, coincidentally, another influential person in my career, a guy called David Guile, actually written a really good book. That's a plug for David's book there. Yeah. I'll see if I can get some commission off of that, actually.
Well, there's actually, he did a leadership event.
He did?
That's where you and I bumped into each other at in the lunch queue.
Wasn't it at the Comrade we did that? I think?
It was, yeah,
there we go.
Yeah.
I was a panel speaker there, that was quite good.
That's right,
I got hammered actually, not in alcohol, I mean on the panel, but it was quite a testing one. So I met David, and I was interviewing to become a general manager for McDonald Hotels. Now, you know, it's your first general manager's job is, you know, baptism of fire, and everyone thinks they're ready and you're never ready. It's the same vernacular as if you're a parent. You know, you've never got enough money and you've never got enough time, so just jump in and get on with it, right? So I interviewed with David for a hotel in Milton Keynes called the Parkston, and I think it was, don't quote me on this where you're going to, but it's 48 bedrooms, I think it was.
Right.
This cute little white building, and obviously coming from the 200 bedroom Grand Harbour 5-star hotel to this Village Warsaw, I think 150 rooms, 5,000 member leisure club, this little 50 bedroom country house hotel in Milton Keynes. But it was mine, and it was my first one. So I remember going through the interview. I met a lot of people in the process. David gave me the opportunity, and it was because of him I became a general manager. You know, I owe him that. Actually, it's because of the GM before that I didn't get on with, and equally then because of David.
It's funny how the rich tapestry of life, though, right? It just, all of these, if you analyse every single thing that happens to you, you can kind of blow your own mind about how the stars get aligned or whatever.
Completely, and I think what's important for us is accepting the fact that even on your best days or your worst days, there's still going to be things that influence you. And I think, you know, if anything, after today, when you're listening to this, I think it's the thread of people that you have in your life and who you surround yourself with that will have the most influence on your success more than anything else. Someone who can tell you when you're doing good, and someone who also has got it in them to give you credible feedback over anything else.
Yeah.
So met David, got the job. I remember, oh my God, the nervous energy I had taking over that role. And I wasn't nervous about the service, I wasn't nervous about the restaurant, all that I knew. I suddenly became really nervous about health and safety. Like, I suddenly became totally anxious about it, because suddenly all the guests are my responsibility, all the team are my responsibility.
Right.
When was the last time we did a fire drill? First question I asked when I walked in, didn't even say hello. I was like, just show me the bit of paper.
Hi, I'm Paul.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul. Where's the fire test? Because you know, suddenly I'm practically accountable for people, and that was a huge challenge. And you know, David coached me incredibly well through that. A lot of pragmatically approaching what we did. But what David's skill was, he gave you a framework to work within, and then gave you the freedom to play within that arena.
Right.
And so your success and your failure was governed by you in that frame. And I loved it. I learned so much. It certainly brought out the entrepreneurial nature within me. I'd only been at the Parkside 11 months before I met Donald McDonald. Came down to me, we had afternoon tea together, as Donald does. He loves an afternoon tea.
Right.
And he asked me to move to Edinburgh. So there's a hotel called the Holyrood there. You know, I'm a first-time GM, 11 months into the gig. The owner of the company sat in front of me. I remember vividly the conversation. I'd bought a new shirt because I wanted it to be the whitest of white shirt.
Yeah.
And every time I turned my head, it rubbed my neck. So I think by the end of talking to him, I just had this sort of stiff upper body that I moved in one entirety. And when I got home that night, a red ring around my neck. So, I wanted it to be, it was so important that I'd made a good impression. And we had this conversation. He wanted me to go up there, give me a call tomorrow and tell me what you want to do. So I phoned David and I was like, okay, that's curveball exciting. You know, David was a regional at the time, so I'd be moving into another person's region.
Yep.
And he supported it and thought it was a really good move for me. So I had to go home, speak to my wife, say, guess what? I know we've just moved from here to here to here to here.
Yeah. Happy and settled, are you?
We're off. Yeah, happy and unsettled. Pack the baby up. We're off again. And then I'm living in Edinburgh. Another whirlwind experience. I think again I'd gone from 50 rooms, say for a little bit of a rounding error, to 200 rooms at the Holyrood.
Right.
So while in today's world that seems quite easy, as a young man, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, this was quite a thing. And also, moving country, that's how I'd convinced myself it was important, and a capital city. So you know, all of these triggers, you're like, wow, this has got to be it.
But also, so that was a property, if I remember rightly, that the owner really had a lot of time for.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. It was the only photo of the hotel that was in the boardroom.
Right.
Where the board met.
Yeah.
So, you know, I knew I was buggered if I got it wrong. But he cared a lot about the business. So you do get yourself sometimes into death and glory. And, you know, running the nearest property, hotel, restaurant, nearest head office is my biggest counsel for anyone who wants to become hyper-growth more than anything else. Because you'll meet everyone. You get the chance to profile yourself better than any other GM within the business. So really important. Had a great time there, great time at the Holyrood. You know, a lot of fundamental things there changed my life about how I run business, people that I met, how I worked. And then I was on the move again. We'd had a challenge at Portal, which was our new golf resort. You know, I said I knew about golf, obviously. I didn't. So suddenly I'm running 3 golf courses.
Knew that there were clubs.
I think the only thing I knew about golf was an expression my friend had, which was that it was a great way to ruin a fabulous walk. I can't even qualify that quote by who said it, but so I had this conversation. Do you want to go? We need a GM to come down here and look after it. Off you go. So yeah, no problem. Have we unpacked Edinburgh yet? Okay. Guess what? We're moving again. We're going to go. Cheshire is where we're now moving to. Now, you know, this part of the process was really difficult because one, I didn't know anything about golf, so I put myself in a situation where I needed to learn super fast. We had a massive spa. I needed to learn that super fast. And the only way to do that was to be really humble and ask the right questions and get on with it and be led by the leaders of those functions. So no matter where I'd got to in my career, this was my third GM's job, I was always inquisitive. The how and the why were really important to me. And I think, early on in my career, and I openly accepted it, this is where my marriage failed because, I'd moved these guys around so much. We'd lived in so many different houses. I think my kid had a half Scot, Charlie his name is, who's actually taller than me at nearly 6'5" now. It's got that sort of Brummy, Scottish, now we're in Cheshire accent going on.
Travelled.
Yeah, he was a well-seasoned, well-travelled. But the sacrifice I'd made at the time was my marriage for that part of my career.
Right.
And I was really grateful, I was very well supported, but I accepted the fact that was the cost of it. And difficult to come to terms with at the time, but the reality of it, all of that is why I'm here today talking to you on this. And you have to, come to terms with some of the things that you've lost or gained along your journey as part of the process and part of your road, and we all deal with that, and I think it's important to openly talk about it and be very mindful about how you approach these things. So here I am in Cheshire learning about golf. Crazy, really crazy, and it was a joint venture as well, and the joint venture was a challenge. We had to manage that relationship. So my first time, I wasn't just working in a hotel that was owned and operated by someone. Suddenly now there's another person involved in it, and you learn thick and fast, right? You learn thick and fast how that works. David, by this time, had made himself the, I think it was chief operating officer or chief executive officer at McDonald's. So that my early mentor was moving up through the ranks as well. Very supportive through the process. So I'm there, working it out, having a really good time actually, starting to understand a little bit about myself. Bigger team, so now ranges on the golf course to spa to all of these things, much more diverse. I was a chef not so many years ago, so now all of a sudden having to go through that, and it was growing pains. It was like, my best description is being a teenager as an adult. So you're inquisitive and wondering why and trying to understand it all. And the one thing that was important to me is always being mindful of the fact that I didn't know. So ask the question, surround yourself with the right people. So off in McDonald I then go to Frimley Hall as a general manager with them. So now I'm back down to London again. So at the Frimley Hall in the Bermondsey is where I ended my time with McDonald Hotels. Great, they taught me a lot about finance, very cost-centric business, taught a lot about managing big groups of people, and taught me a lot about being adaptable. And all of those things have played into my career later on. From there, I moved to Q Hotels, so I became a regional for Q. Because I blagged the golf experience with Portal, hey presto, I'm suddenly running 3 golf resorts in the north of England. And these were big. The Forest Pines, Westerwood, these are big properties, big, serious properties. My first regional role, so now I'm managing other GMs as well.
Well, that means you can kind of get away with it then, can't you? Just put it on there.
I got here, right? So it was, I got here through humility, and I think ultimately now I'm starting to really understand my leadership style and my approach. I still don't think I totally understand it today, sat here with you, because I think as we evolve and culture evolves, our styles need to evolve with that as well. So here I am, 3 golf resorts up in the north, still living in London, so in Putney, driving up to the north on a Monday, driving home on a Friday in my really old Vauxhall Vectra. Hey, that was my whip at the time. I was well proud of it. It was silver. It was a highlight of my life. I knew it was good because I had a CD player that I had to plug in with one of those tape things. It was really cool. Yeah, I was really happy with that. It gave me a lot of time for self-reflection. It was the first time I was really working away from home. And I used to use the evenings to really read a lot and study a lot and just understand more about me. And I think that really helped shape me. And to this day, I still do. I've just finished Atomic Habits by James Clear, and I'm in the process of reading Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And if you haven't listened to that podcast or book, then that needs to be your number one thing to do after listening to this.
Right. Honestly, the list of books that I keep getting recommended.
But it's good though, isn't it? I mean, it's how we're learning now.
Absolutely,
I think it's a good thing. So here I am. As I'd said at the beginning, I'd always been focused on what I wanted next to be. And next to me was getting back into London, running a hotel in London. That had always been my thing.
Right.
So every step I was making, every interview that I had, and I started interviewing for London jobs, most probably at the Bermondsey when I was there. And it was, you don't have London experience. You don't have, that was the common thing, you don't have London experience. But without anyone telling you that you need to get into London to get London experience. You know, it's one of those things that it felt like the impossible task. So I spoke to David, obviously my mentor, and he was like, look, the best way to crack London is to go and become a regional, because you'll come into London as a lone site. But the fact you've done regional will really help your credibility when you come into London. Right. So I was like, fine, that's where the Forest Pines decision came from. So my step into these larger resorts was not because I wanted to step in the larger resorts, it's because I wanted London.
2 steps ahead.
Yeah, always thinking 2 steps ahead.
Yeah.
And you know, I had some good times and bad times. You know, golf was a difficult thing to manage. All of those things were really difficult. You know, culturally, it was a business that I didn't really settle in. And I think I never truly settled within Q. And that was a grind, it was tough. But I knew what the step was, and I knew the process that I was going through to get to where I wanted to be. It also taught me very quickly that you should have pride and passion to say that you work somewhere, and that should be integral to what you're doing. And if it isn't fitting, equally have the balls to say, it's just not me, and go. And that really taught me that. So, I want London. All of my friends that are recruiters are like, look, we'll get you in somehow. I interviewed for a few. You know, you'll step down to a DGM. I was like, you know, I want London, but not at the sacrifice of my soul, right? I'm willing to step down to a GM, but next you'll say I need to go back to being a chef and work my way back up. That's just not cutting the mustard. Yeah. So I had this opportunity.
I never kind of understand. I understand that you kind of need to know local marketplaces and things like that, but at the same time,
but I didn't know Edinburgh. I didn't
exactly.
know Birmingham.
I was just about to make the point that you've always stepped into somewhere and you learn. Yeah. Why should London be any different?
It's the holy grail, isn't it? It's where everyone wants to get to, and I finally understood why when I got in. Spoiler alert to what happens next, by the way. But so I interviewed with IHG, a guy called Peter Brennan. Peter was running the managed estate for LRG as part of IHG's framework in London. A really cool guy, and you know, I credit Peter openly to a lot of what happened after IHG actually.
Right.
So I got the job. I got it. I nailed it. I got the job. So I was general manager Holiday in Mayfair. Ironic because obviously I'd worked at Langham's over the road, so there was this feeling of circularity to my career where that as a chef is where I had been, and now as where I dreamed of being a general manager in London. As that early young chef, this is where I ended up now.
It's mad.
It's mental, isn't it?
Yeah.
Running the business and then looking at it. So I remember by this time I found another partner, Arlene, who was in the industry, which gave me more flexibility around understanding the industry. Lucy wasn't. So I think that helped. And I remember taking her for dinner in Langham's, just having bangers and mash, which was one of the things I used to cook, and sitting there, and it was a real oh my god moment that, you know, it's still the same waiting staff, by the way, it was still the same restaurant manager, they're all still in there, and going down seeing Dennis downstairs and, you know, seeing some of the chefs, I don't know, there was just this serendipitous moment, right, where it all comes round again. And I think this, if you visualise where you want to be, it's going to help. So here I am running this hotel, learning London, met a really amazing network of London GMs, 2 of which, Matthew and Simon, are still, I would class them as my closest friends today, because it's a community. What I learned about London is that network is important, expectations are really high. I mean, I was running a Holiday Inn with, you know, average room rates over 200 quid. Yeah. Still a Holiday Inn product, right? So it was my first real foray into branded, so learning about that. Managed and owned relationship, my first foray into that. Suddenly I'm in a global company as well. Suddenly, you know, I was doing my induction in Paris, and you're like, I don't really understand what's happening in my life. And God, every day was learning hard, because London market, as we know, is all one day, nothing the next day. It's more midweek than it is weekends. All of these things that are the opposite of where I was in provincial properties.
Couldn't get a golf course on the roof.
I was so bloody glad about that, to be honest with you. That would be amazing. Worked with some cool people. Michelle, one of our revenue managers, taught me a lot more about revenue than I learned up until that day. I used to have a competition with her where I would try and do the revenue strategy myself. Like, it became between me and her how we would do it. Obviously mine never won. There was this one day it did. And I remember taking a selfie with her and posting it all over every social network possibly I could. It was the day I beat my revenue manager. You know, in all the time that I was there, it was only happened one day. But I'm still talking about it to this day, right?
Finding out,
and I'll send this to Michelle to make sure she can hear this, because she'll be reveling in the fact that every other day she beat me. But I worked with some amazing brains, and an opportunity came up in IHG. By this time I'd won GM of the year, we'd had Hotel of the Year under my belt. We were racking it up thick and fast. We had the best guest satisfaction scores in London. So all of the stuff around people and culture and everything that I'd learned about managing teams, I was putting into play. So they were right. I did need to be a regional to come back. I did need to have that more helicopter view to a business than being so micro and thinking about it as one hotel. So in fairness, and I owe it to them, all that counsel was right. So a job came up, and a job came up was head of boutique operations, looking after Hotel Indigo at the time, Europe, Russia and Israel. And I was like, man, that sounds really hot. I loved lifestyle propositions. It's where we spent most of our time. Arlene was currently People and Culture Director for Firmdale, so we knew it really well. And I was like, look, I'm just going to chuck it in, right? Have a crack at it and see how I get on. I'm a single GM in Holiday Inn Mayfair. Let's see how we go. Wow, I got it. It was incredible. I met Didier, who was the head of the function. We looked after all Intercontinental, all 5 stars and lifestyle in that function.
Yeah.
Didier was the king of 5-star hotels, right? Taught me a lot. Very French. He asked me if I liked French people. That was the first question he asked in the interview, which I thought was amazing. Very tongue-in-cheek. And I knew from then his humour and our alignment in terms of culturally and what we wanted to achieve was super there. So, I was lucky. Working with Stephen McCall, who was my final interview for it. Stephen at the time was Chief Operating Officer for Europe, Russia and Israel at the time. He gave me that opportunity with Didier, and I never really looked back. It was mostly some of the most fundamental 4 years of my life. Bouncing around Europe, we had 16 hotels when we started, we finished with 33. We integrated Kimpton into Europe from the US, and we launched a white label brand called the QO in Amsterdam. I learned a lot about brand, people, culture, development, operations, all of that. And I certainly learned about managing that in different time zones, different countries, different languages, and ultimately learning how to manage people of different cultures actually became hugely interesting to me. I really challenged myself to learn that. And again, go back to that learning, that young mentality that I had, which is always asking why. Put yourself in jobs that are stretching you and testing you, because that's in my world how I thrive. Not for everyone, but for me that was it.
Yeah.
Suddenly I've gone regional 3 hotels in the north running some golf courses, 1 hotel in London, boom, 16 hotels all around Europe. Do you speak French, German, Italian? No. Let's go for it then. Let's see how we get on.
That's exactly the same as, have you done golf before, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. The difference is, I mostly could swing a club. I don't know if I want to try German just off the bat, right? So, and here I found myself. This role is where I found out who Paul really was, and it's a humbling experience to go through some of those highs and lows that get you there. The tiredness of travelling, dealing with multiple time zones, and I'd never been so excited. That's most probably defining wise one of the jobs that I most romantically look back on. There's my chef job, there's working at Langham's, there's my first GM's job, my first 5-star job, but this as a big role was huge.
Yeah.
And I made some mistakes along the way. Stephen will remind you of those. I hope you have the chance to speak to him. He still reminds me to this day, but I'm grateful. And I think working with Stephen was mostly one of the biggest shifts for me. Working with a leader that was very self-aware, and equally, he's a Glaswegian that gives very direct advice. And sometimes you want to hear it, and sometimes you don't want to hear it, but you always need to hear it. And I think I learned that quite quickly. So working with Stephen again was a real privilege. Was a real privilege, and having that opportunity to learn multiple sides, multiple languages, opening new hotels. I'd done Village Warsaw, Junction 10 off the M6. Suddenly we're in Paris with bricks and mortar, and it's like, it's a tad different, but the concept's the same. It's still, the value of how you build it and structure it was still the same. So I grew up a lot, I think. I did a lot of my maturing through IHG, particularly learning how to sit in a matrix and learning how to sit in a global company, and learning that sometimes you have to conform. And actually what I learned more than anything is that you don't. I was an outcast in IHG in terms of I sat outside of the head nodding agreeing. I wanted to create something in Indigo and Kimpton and the QO that sat differently, that felt different. And as a global company, there's a sterilization of those ideas. And you can rage against the machine for so long, but you are maybe there's 2 or 3 of you with a similar voice against a global organization. So I owe IHG that ability to learn in that, and I also owe IHG for teaching me actually what was important to me, particularly through personal values and growth and being able to have a voice. And even if sometimes the voice doesn't get heard, making sure that you champion those ideas, and it's important that you do.
Yeah.
And sometimes ideas are good, sometimes ideas are bad, and it's no bad thing having them knocked back, but it's just trying to understand that why. It goes back to my fascination with why it didn't work. So IHG was great, loved it, really, really shapely part of my career. IHG went through a restructure, and myself, Steve, and a few of the other guys a lot of the other guys went through a redundancy process. So I was made redundant. That was first time, so that was a really humbling experience. At that ironically incredibly well timed, because it landed at the same time that my second son was due, Jack. So I fundamentally had a period of time off where I was full-time dad, doing my podcast, helping out some businesses along the way, and I got to a stage where I was just playing with a few bits, keeping my mind active.
Was that Fick Racket?
Yeah, Fick Racket became, which is Swedish for pocket rocket.
I was going to ask you where the hell that name came from.
Yeah, very, very cool, right? And we did a load of things. It's a little business. We helped some restaurants open. We helped brand some hotels. We helped work with some really good organisations, and I loved it. I was able to do what I want, when I wanted, how I wanted. What that never gave me was the stress or the kind of excitement that I'd had, that sort of that bit I was in IHG, where I had that huge portfolio that needed a lot of attention and work. And at the time, fundamentally, I was with my son, which was amazing. So as a father, best time of my life, right? Most shapely time of my life. The business was great. Arlene and I, we refer to it as the summer of love because it was really sunny. We were all, it was great. Arlene had started her own company by then as well. So it was amazing. Don't get me wrong. But there was always that little thing missing, and that little thing was, the definition of what I built my career on to get to there. Yep. So I got approached to go and work for, ironically, a garden centre company called Dobby's. Now, it seems really out of nature to do it, and I was like, the approach was interesting, but what it was the biggest job I've ever had. So it was running fundamentally 70 restaurants across the UK that at the time were all counter service restaurants, and being involved with the largest group of people that I'd ever had, the biggest teams I'd ever had. So from a senior leadership role, it was a learning experience. So I jumped in. I was like, the vision was to move them all to table service restaurants. So I was like, okay, I've got a legacy here. I can come in, biggest job I've ever had, really senior job, shape all of these restaurants, shape the culture, and go for it. Yeah. Worked with a guy called Graham, who was my CEO, and we got to it. We really got stuck in, fundamentally changing the operation. And you were serving tens of thousands of people a day. So this wasn't an operation where it was 5 people in a Michelin star restaurant. This was 10,000 people buying a £2.50 scone. Yeah. So it was hard volume.
That's a big change from counter to table.
But I needed to learn it. I needed to learn managing on scale. I needed to learn production on mass. It was a string to my bow I didn't have. Yeah. And equally, how do you then change the culture and offer within that for a group of guests that are quite rigid in their ways, and a group of team members that had always done it that way? We did our first restaurant conversion. We opened 600-seater restaurant, order at the table. Jeez. We were in. We ripped the plaster off pretty quick and dirty, and learned. I remember the first day I was there, I was like, okay, this is looking good. An hour later, I'm on the pass trying to work out how I got like 3,500 checks to deal with. So that night, there was certainly a regrouping after that night. Yeah. Because no test ever ramps up for actually what it's like. Yeah. And we've done loads of tests. And my legacy leaving there was over half of the estate had moved to it, and the rest of it was under refurbishment. So I'd done what I needed to do and achieved it and learnt it. Yeah, it's really shapely. A lot of lessons learnt there, a lot of lessons in terms of approach, a lot of lessons at senior leadership, a lot of lessons on managing change at scale. So yeah, really good, and I'm really glad that I did it. People think that it looks weird on the CV, but it only looks weird if you don't understand the intent that's behind it. And I think all too often we judge people's careers on a CV without judging their story that sits behind it. And the story is actually more important.
Couldn't agree more.
First question I ask in an interview is, "I've read your CV, tell me the story," because that's what's more important to me.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's exactly what I do as well. That's why I have a podcast.
It's kind of your gig, right? So I'd gone through this process and I came out the other side of it. Really had a good time at Dobby's, and then Stephen McCall. Stephen was working as Chief Executive Officer for Eden. We'd actually spoken a few times leading up to this, and there was a Director of Operations role on the table. The guys were just expanding into Europe. I loved the brand. I thought Lock and Eden were absolutely stunning. Come and stayed a couple of times. Met Stephen and Eric here a couple of times in Bermondsey. And the Europe expansion, so it's back to that sweet spot that I had of opening and running hotels within Europe. It took about a nanosecond for me to accept it, like a split. One, the privilege of working with Stephen again, bearing in mind, I know he was a straight talking guy, so wouldn't have you back if there wasn't an intent behind it.
Yeah.
A young brand that is evolving and shaping, and ultimately moving back into Europe. So and here I am today, sitting in front of you, telling that story. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I mean, what I love about your story is this sort of underriding thing of you clearly don't enjoy comfort, and I mean that in a positive way. I don't mean as in feet up with Netflix.
I enjoy luxury. That was a different thing to comfort.
But no, really cracking story. One thing that came up in my research was a stint at the Disney Institute.
Yeah.
That intrigued. What the hell is that all about?
So it was. I think at the time it was being offered by De Vere. So we had the opportunity. I think there were 8 of us that were chosen to go through the Disney Institute. And what the Disney Institute gave you was the pure service lens, like genuine how you look at service, how you sort of have a relentless approach to hospitality in any way, shape or form. And equally, it taught me a lot about how you recruit people based on personality rather than a stereotype, or how you...
Or CV.
Yeah, or CV, or that ability to be able to find great people, and that's what Disney does really well, right, through great selection days. So I loved the Disney Institute. Could I have done Disney? Would I have done Disney? I think I'd have dressed up as a character and loved it, but I don't think for longevity it would have been me. But yeah, the Disney Institute really gave me that grounding.
This has actually given me the second opportunity to make the point that on a previous podcast we were all forgetting Raymond Blanc and Winnie the Pooh outfit. So I'm putting that out there again.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, I'm still visualising it, it'll come true.
Look, let's make it happen, right?
What's in store for Eden and Lock in the coming year / beyond?
We're opening 7 new hotels this year.
Wow.
5 next year, 5 the year after at the moment. So, Eden's approach and Lock's approach, we are a people-centric business. Soulful hospitality is what we're about. So, first of all, defining how that hospitality is delivered is a huge part of what we're doing. Redefining the design space is a huge part of it. If you look on our website and have a look at our properties, you'll see that really articulated brilliantly. And for us, a lot of us are corporate refugees that sit around that table. So there's a lot of us that want to create a business built on values that mean something to us. And my example I used at the beginning, when we spent half a day talking about team members and our approach to that and our approach to our culture, I think is a hugely valuable part of what we do. So for me now, I won't tell you what my next 2 steps are, because it's all part of that internalisation, but I've got a clear direction of what I want to achieve. I've got a clear passion for this business. And Stephen asked me the other day how I feel, and I said I feel dead at home. Like, I genuinely have moved into a role that I'm sat here doing an interview on a work day in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans, feeling very at home and very comfortable in an environment that I love, surrounded by people that I'm inspired by. So tell me something better than that.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean that was the one thing from the outside looking in when the announcement was made that you were joining as Director of Ops. Not that at that time I knew so much about the brand, and you and I have had a few dealings with over the years, but from the outside looking in, it felt like a real coming together in terms of what you're all about. You're a force of nature, and I mean that again in a positive, like you've got fantastic energy towards the industry, but you can only get that if you're in the right space, right?
Yeah.
You don't get that same energy and passion if you're not where you're supposed to be. And to me, it feels like you are exactly where you need to be right now.
I genuinely feel that as well, and thank you for calling that out. You know, for me, you've got to have pride in what you do. It's got to align to your personal values. It's got to mean something to you.
Yeah.
And here, I'm surrounded by a group of people that all want the same thing, and we all want to make the industry better. We all want to redefine how we look after people, how we deliver hospitality, how we design businesses, and all of us have got a level of pride that comes with that as well. So, you know, I've never felt, and the word is not comfortable, because I certainly do not feel comfortable because there's so much going on. But I've never, that balance I talk about between headiness of stress and excitement, that sort of knife edge that I trade on, here I've got that, and either side I've got a comfort blanket of people who I know will pick me up if ever they need to.
Yeah, that's worth its weight in gold. Brilliant. Well, look, there's so many other questions I'd love to ask, but I'm very conscious.
Maybe there's episode 2.
We'll do a part 2.
Yeah, there you go.
Because I'm sure there's a lot more stories we can get into. But,
I don't know how many I'll tell openly, but yeah, there's definitely a few of them.
I'd love the little tagline on your podcast actually around some random stories involving drinking. So we'll definitely
lots of those.
We'll come back and talk about that another time. Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing your story so far with us, and wish you all the very best for the reopenings and beyond.
Thanks, man. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. Have a good one. Cheers.
And there we have it, an all-action, non-stop chat with Paul, who has clearly been strategic in his career building and is totally reaping the benefits. Get yourself over to a lock near you if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, we'll be back at 8 PM next Wednesday with more stories from hospitality, but until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.